guys, it's Godbars here, the self-proclaimed hip-hop historian, and today I'm breaking away from my usual format to do something a little bit different, a list of my top 50 favorite hip-hop albums released in 2023. So here I'm going to go through what, in my opinion, were the 50 best rap albums of the year, starting with 50, going down to number 1 being my favorite. However, keep in mind that I heavily enjoy every album on here, even plenty of albums not on here. The main purpose of this list is to show the crowd that every year says hip hop is dead, how ridiculous they come off to anybody who remotely pays attention. I myself actually released an album earlier this year, but obviously it would have been pretty corny to put that on the list, let alone objectively false. Before we get to the main list, I have a not so short set of honorable mentions to get through, and they'll be listed down in the description as well, since I'm going to try to get through these ones pretty fast. First up, we have the fitting collaboration between Shay Noir and Big Ghost Ltd, Noir Never. Then it's Billmatic, a creative yet respectful tribute to the iconic Nas debut done by Nonfiction's Ill Bill. 2 Chainz and Lil Wayne come together for the clever and braggadocious Welcome to Collegrove, as do Aminé and KAYTRANADA for the summary KAYTRAMINÉ. UK underground veterans Young Fathers continue carrying the torch for underground hip-hop with their latest LP Heavy Heavy, and Northern California artist Semetary continues on his quest to blow out every eardrum in the country on Butcher House. Griselda affiliate Rome Streetz continues to build on his Noise Candy series with the sequel to Noise Candy 4, Noise Candy 5. He isn't the only one continuing the series, though, as Lloyd Banks of G Unit released his third of the Course of the Inevitable series, and 100 Gecs furthered their noisy, hyper approach to experimental pop on 10,000 Gecs. Smoke DZA links up with none other than Flying Lotus for the Flying Objects EP, which only didn't make my main 50 because as an EP it's only 14 minutes long. It was actually a similar situation with Niontay's Demon Muppets EP, which coincidentally was also 14 minutes in length. You also have to at least mention Young Nudy's Gumbo, as well as the interesting blend of styles Harry Fraud and RXK Nephew pulled off on Life After Neph. There's some others that I originally had in my top 50, but as the year progressed, they got pushed out by the competition. Like one of the multiple Boldy James releases to come out this year, Indiana Jones with RichGains, as well as Leather Boulevard by Brown Kool-Aid, Blockbusta by Busta Rhymes, Maxo's surreal and captivating Even God Has a Sense of Humor, Born Again by Danger Mouse and Gemini the Gifted One, which was actually recorded back in 2004, along with They Spit on Jesus by Elcamino and the Black Soprano Family, as well as SD Nack's Hacksaw Jim Duncan. I also wanted to shout out the uplifting yet personal newest LP from Count Bass D, Walter Dwight, who still has one of the most enigmatic voices in the game, as well as New York's designated roastmaster Nems, who met up with Scram Jones for the cold-blooded Rise of the Silverback. Lastly, the biggest honorable mention of all has to go to Herbert by Absol, whose amazing project only didn't make the list because it came out at the end of 2022, but I still wanted to shout it out because its mid-December release date got it snubbed from a lot of lists at the end of last year. There's obviously many more quality releases from 2023 that I didn't get around to, but we gotta move on to the main 50 or we'll be here all day. So I'm going to go about these in a similar way to the honorable mentions. I may try to give a little more detail when I get closer to the top, but for the most part, I'm just listing out what my personal 50 favorite albums of the year were when it comes to hip hop. Starting us at 50, we have Ransom and Nicholas Craven with their long-awaited and enjoyable, though at times slightly questionable, Director's Cut 4, which was a follow-up to 2020's Director's Cut Scene 3. At 49, we have another New York MC who's never not working, Conway the Machine, with his feature-filled bar-heavy curation drum work, The Album. Coming in at 48, we have the North Memphis powerhouse Juicy J, showing how the influential rapping and production style that 3-6 Mafia developed is still as relevant as ever on Mental Trillness. Also hearing him work with younger dudes he inspired like Xavier Wolf or Finesse Two Times is kind of a cool full circle moment. Following him at 47, I put the newest experimental album from UK grime and garage legend The Streetz, also known as Mike Skinner, titled The Dark, the Shadow, the Brighter, the Light. At 46, we have the gritty Champagne for Breakfast, which sees a trifecta of legends come together in the form of Mayhem Lauren, DJ Muggs, and Madlib. And for 45, it's Travis Scott's moody, atmospheric trap journey Utopia. Following him at 44, Rat King's Wiki links with Tony Seltzer for the rich and colorful 14K Figaro. And coming in at 43, we have Uncut Gems, where old school pioneer Diamond D is assisted by Dylan in his quest of continuing the old school sound while keeping it fresh, modern, and exciting. Following them, beloved duo Atmosphere actually had a few releases this year, but I think my favorite one would probably have to be the first one they came out with, which was called So Many Other Realities Exist Simultaneously. And then at 41, we have North American Adonis, the almost avant garde collaboration between Canadian experimental hip hop pioneer Buck 65 with Dose One and Gel, two of the founders of legendary alternative rap label Anticon. Coming in at number 40 is Conductor Williams, who, on top of his Conductor Machine LP he did with Conway earlier in the year, also released one of the best instrumental albums the genre saw this year with Conductor We Have a Problem. Following that at 39, we have The Great Escape, where underground OG Larry June comes together with The Alchemist for one of the myriad of albums he released this year, as you'll see later in the list. For 38, it's No Name, who gave us one of her more direct and upfront projects with Sundial, and though there was definitely an amount of controversy floating around the album, it doesn't really devalue the music on it to me that much. Then at 37, we have Jay Worthy and Rock Marciano, who brought light, atmospheric songs with that grimy, minimal edge on Nothing Bigger Than the Program. Crossing over to the other side of the pond at 36, it's Ugly, the brutally honest and kind of punk-inspired LP by the enigmatic English rapper Slow Tie. And at 35, we have Zartificial Intelligence, the newest release from Boom Bap Masters Esoteric, 7L, and Inspecta Deck. Coming in at 34, it's Headspace, an impressive futuristic mix of electronic and hip hop music by Air, an exciting duo comprised of New Jersey producer J Words and Brooklyn MC Masai, both of whom I'm definitely going to have an eye on moving forward. For 33, we have Blockhead, who always recruits dope MCs to rap over his beats, but he really outdid himself this time with what's arguably the most stacked feature list in the whole underground scene this year. Coming in at 32, it's Navy Blue with his touching personal collection of songs on Ways of Knowing. And following him for 31, we have Faith is a Rock, a collab between three artists who were all on their grinds this year and all actually made this list separately with other releases, those being Mike, Wiki, and The Alchemist. For the 30th spot, we have Heavy Bravado, the unsettling double entendre filled LP between LA rapper producer Oh No and Detroit's master of rhyme schemes Elzai. Then at 29, it's The Mind of a Saint, the jazzy, uplifting partnership between Skyzoo and the other guys. And following them at 28 is Bad News, another unexpected but worthwhile collaboration, this time between Blue and the talented guys at Real Bad Man, who also were on a pretty impressive run this year. For 27, I have Ice Cold Bishop, an artist I actually wasn't too familiar with prior to this album, as I believe this is actually his debut. But if that is the case, Generational Curse is one pretty impressive first album. If you're a big fan of JID, Earthgain, or that kind of higher register flow that Kendrick will use at times, I would definitely check this out. For the 26th spot, I went with Fatboy Sharif and Steel Tip Dove with their distorted and very fittingly titled Project Decay. At the 25th spot, it's Quaranta, the latest somber, reflective, and ironically kind of sobering album from Danny Brown. Coming in at 24 is Los Angeles duo Paris, Texas, who came through with their creative and forward-thinking second album, Mid-Air. And for 23, we have Notorious Dump Legends Volume 2 from another duo that never fails, Makami and the God Fahim. At 22, it's Apollo Brown and Planet Asia with Sardines, the long-awaited sequel to their 2017 collaboration Anchovies. Then coming in at 21, we have the dense conceptual integrated tech solutions by Aesop Rock. There's a good chance if I had a little more time to sit with this album, it actually would have broken into my top 20. The competition was so stiff, I had to boil it down to which albums I've listened to more, which of course kind of gave the ones that came out earlier in the year kind of an unfair advantage. Now that we're at the top 20, I'm going to give a little more commentary behind each album, starting with West Side Guns and Then You Pray for Me at number 20. This is hypothetically supposed to be his last album, but I'm kind of expecting, or at least I hope it's going to end up to be more like a kind of Black Album situation. This album pretty much still has all the boxes checked for what you'd expect and want from a West Side release. But for me, it was lacking this certain element that some of his favorite albums of mine have that really could have taken it to the next level. That being said, it's still a well produced, very enjoyable Griselda release, with the usual dope artwork, quality feature and producer roster, and the typical Fly God aesthetic. After him at number 19, I went with Mike, who actually makes his second appearance on this list with his impressive solo release, Burning Desires. From his ear for samples to the trance like state his more deliberately monotone flow can put you in, Mike holds your attention throughout the entire 24 song track list. And between this LP and the collaboration with Wiki and Uncle Al I mentioned earlier, he's really won me over this year from more of a casual listener to a genuine fan. For number 18, I kind of cheated a bit by letting two albums actually share this spot, those being Magic 2 and 3 by Nas, because I didn't want to give both projects their own spot and have to kick somebody else off, but I also enjoyed them too much to leave one off entirely. So this was kind of the compromise I came up with, and if you've heard the first album in the Magic series, or the King's Disease trilogy he also did with Hit Boy, you probably have a decent idea of what to expect here. Not to say that is a negative, or even to say that they don't take any risks on these albums. To me, this was just more kind of Nas doing a victory lap for this unprecedented run he's been on the last few years, and I think it's pretty safe to say that it's one of the most legendary second wins any rappers had this late in their career. Coming in at number 17, we have Art of Disrespect by Speaker Bullies, the collaborative effort between Superstition and Praise. This album is just front to back, militaristic, in your face boom bap, with expertly crafted verses in a style that kind of pays homage to older hip hop while not feeling dated or like it's pointlessly hating on the current landscape. It combats thoughtless and boring hip hop by turning heads with explosive, professionally written and delivered verses, opposed to some corny, discount conscious Dax song. This is real, authentic rap music, yet instead of wallowing in the past or waxing nostalgic, they use their skilled pens and ears for production to push the entire subgenre of boom bap into the future. Following them, at 16, it's the God Fahim, who as usual had a handful of releases this year, but my favorite would definitely have to be Iron Bull. This album has been on repeat so much, it may have even taken Dump Goat's spot as my favorite Fahim album. I've always loved the samples he picks and how he chooses to loop them, but he really outdid himself here, complementing these instrumentals with his trademark delivery and vocal tone. His style of rapping makes it impossible to ever confuse him with his features, in fact, it's the opposite. With frequent collaborators like Mac Homie or Yoral Drew pretty much always bringing something unique to the table while still meshing really well with Fahim. Coming in at number 15, we have Open Mike Eagle with another triumph of ghetto engineering. While I don't love this album quite as much as last year's component system with the auto reverse, that's only really because that album got number 2 on the top 50 that I did on my Instagram last year, so that would have been a pretty tall order to expect this to beat that. This newest Open Mic album has a lot of the same qualities that I loved about his last release, and while it may not necessarily build on everyone in some vast, expansive way, I don't really think it has to. If you're looking for witty, hilarious, and expertly crafted verses, dripping in clever wordplay and personality, this is one you definitely need to give a try, providing you've already listened to Dark Comedy and Brick Body Kids Still Daydream. Coming in at 14, we have Mick Jenkins, who sets a masterclass on combining raw, socially conscious rap with more contemporary street references. on the patience. While I respect and even enjoy a lot of the work Mick Jenkins has done over the last decade, for me, this project is the most polished and well executed LP that Mick has released since The Waters. He's insightful, witty, and innovative as ever when it comes to how he approaches verse structures and how he seems to have a never ending number of flows and ideas. Switching gears a bit, number 13 is the highest ranking instrumental hip hop album to land in this list, The Cinematic Action Adventure by DJ Shadow. He may have been pioneering experimental, sample based hip hop more than 30 years ago now, but on his latest LP, the legendary California DJ shows that his glory days are nowhere near behind him. Action Adventure is one of the most captivating and enveloping experiences I had all year, and it's one of the most memorable instrumental albums I've heard in recent memory. I think even someone who's typically kind of cynical towards hip hop would have to acknowledge and appreciate what DJ Shadow pulls off here. Following him at number 12, we have someone who's also no stranger to making instrumental albums and beat tapes, DC rapper producer Odyssey with his latest project To What End. However, while he produces practically the entire thing, this is by no means an instrumental project, as Odyssey shows his more than proficient skills as an MC track after track. He's been a very consistent artist for over a decade now, but the amount of just absolutely gorgeous songs on here is borderline stunning. It also doesn't hurt that Odyssey sounds as hungry on the mic as ever, and lyrically just shreds apart every beat he tackles. Just barely missing the top 10 at number 11, it's Killer Mike with Michael, his first proper solo album since 2012's Rap Music. This album probably could have made the top 50 off of Three Stacks' verse on Scientists and Engineers alone, but adversely, void of that gem, this album still would have been amazing, and it's one of the most enjoyable and well executed albums in Mike's whole discography. He tackles a variety of sounds, styles, and topics, and you can feel the personality and passion just radiating off every song. I think a lot of people will probably have this higher in their lists, and while I would have as well if you asked me earlier in the year, I just didn't love it quite as much as these next 10, though make no mistake, I definitely did love it. Well, here we are at the top 10, and I just wanted to reiterate that none of the albums on this list are bad. A lot of the ones I left off aren't even bad. I just didn't have enough room for everybody, and these are the 10 that ultimately rose to the top for me, and I probably played these ones more than any others. At number 10, we have what I believe is the third appearance of The Alchemist on this list with his addictively unsettling LP with Earl Sweatshirt, Voir Dire. At this point, Uncle Al is just a chain smoking force of nature who seems pretty set on having the most dense production discography in modern hip hop and building entire albums for virtually any rapper whose sound he thinks he can add on to. And he's never wrong, as his dark, minimal production couldn't have had a better partner than Earl, which is why they've been frequent collaborators for at least a decade now. I also feel like this is one of the best projects that Earl's put out in years, and whether it's age, experience, or both, he sounds noticeably more mature and confident to me, and it's definitely one of my favorite Earl projects in recent memory. Coming in at number 9, we have the California rapper producer Celestiphone and his abstract but weirdly mesmerizing paper cut from the obit. While he's still relatively new on the scene to my knowledge, Celestiphone stands out with his somewhat nerdy, idiosyncratic flow, clever references, and mind spinning blend of genres. You can tell he takes a lot of influence lyrically and stylistically from MC Paul Barman, especially since MCPB turns up on here to give us a classic Paul Barman verse on Babies, the closing track. With guest appearances from the likes of R.A.P. Ferreira and Armin Hammer, it's clear Celestiphone is on the radar of many alternative and underground rap legends. This is one of those albums that's almost indescribable. It's such a trippy and unique experience. I really would recommend checking it out for yourself because I really can't do it justice. For number 8, I went with Genesis Owusu's almost post-apocalyptic yet relentlessly catchy LP Struggler. Following up his stellar 2021 album Smiling with No Teeth, Genesis Owusu easily could have met the same fate a lot of artists do, which is falling victim to the infamous sophomore slump. However, he didn't rush to put out some hastily slapped together follow up a few months later, but he also didn't just sit back and relish in the success of his first album. He got right to work, putting together another conceptual mix of styles, and with so many different genres he excels in, you could hardly classify him solely as a rapper. Coming in at number 7, we have Serpent, another real Batman production. But for this one, it's with all-time great Kool Keith, who you may know from Dr. Octagon, Ultramagnetic MCs, or any of his other 500 personas and characters. It really can't be understated how much work this dude has put and continues to put into hip-hop. He's had 4 albums this year alone, and this is someone who came onto the scene in the 80s. He's one of the very few MCs who's this polished into his 60s. You could even make the argument he's giving us some of the best verses of his career. He's as witty and provocative as ever, and I feel like Real Badman really brought out the best in Keith through what's, in my opinion, their tightest set of instrumentals to date. Closing in on the top 5, at number 6, it's the monster MC Black Thought, who links up with a talented band of musicians to provide instrumentation for his latest LP, Glorious Game, except it isn't the Roots, it's Al Michaels' Affair. Led by Leon Michaels, they dabble in a wide selection of genres, just some of which include R&B, soul, funk, hip hop, jazz, and even Afrobeat. An issue albums like this can sometimes suffer from is coming off as if the band just jammed and recorded a session, then the MC later wrote to it like they would a typical beat. I may be wrong, but I don't get the impression that's how they went about Glorious Game. It feels more like the music was crafted around the rhymes, and there was equal effort on both ends to make the collaboration work. While I said earlier how Nas is kind of in a league of his own when it comes to late career resurgences, Black Thought isn't that far behind, not only with his impeccable output with The Roots, but he even had one of the best albums last year as well when he met up with Danger Mouse for Cheat Codes. And now here we are at the top 5 for my top 50 hip hop albums of 2023. And starting this final group off, at number 5, we have Maps, the latest collaborative effort between Kenny Siegel and Billy Woods. This wouldn't be the first time that these two worked together, as their LP Hiding Places actually caught a good amount of attention and turned more heads to Billy than usual. I didn't think they'd be able to match the insane quality of that last LP, but not only did they do that, but a lot of people think they even passed it with Maps. These two are both some of the best you can find at setting an established mood and atmosphere, and when they join together to develop one, it always pays off. You also get to hear some fun combinations of Billy with other legendary MCs like Danny Brown, Aesop Rock, and Quelle Chris. I keep thinking that Billy's going to eventually run out of ideas or paint himself into a corner, but he just proves me more and more wrong with each passing year. Following Maps at number 4, we have an even grittier and more disturbing experience, if that's possible, with Sketch 185 and Jeff Markey's He Left Nothing for the Swim Back. To me, this album has a disturbing, almost menacing vibe to it where you really never feel like you can relax and you're pretty much never not on edge. Some of these instrumentals will give me the feeling of being in water, but instead of just calmly floating in the ocean on your back, with this album, it's like you're in the deepest corner of the ocean that no light gets through. The beats are especially claustrophobic, noisy, and intense, even for a Backwoods Studios release, and Sketch 185 brings the type of harsh lyricism and delivery that could probably warrant him to front a metal band, not to mention his distressing and poetic lyricism, which is closer to the type of thing you'd hear MC Ride Death Grips put together. This album barely cracks half an hour, but it feels so much longer to me because just every aspect is cranked up to 10 for the whole thing. This is one of those LPs that I think people will be returning to for a long time. I know I will, because there's so many layers. You'll probably be finding new details after 20 listens. Coming in at number 3, we have an album that's not quite as dark as the last couple, but it's no less poetic. I'm talking about Beloved Paradise Jazz, the latest stellar project by McKinley Dixon. This album is half an hour of lush, beautifully arranged instrumentals, thought-provoking and socially aware commentary, and infectious flows with character and personality. Most of these songs have passages that will musically swell or take a different direction, and it makes the experience feel like even more of a journey. This isn't the type of rapper just throwing uninspired verses over boring horn loops and calling it jazz rap and pretending it's conscious and better than other rap by default. These are songs where practically every independent element has soul and feel on its own, and when they all come together, you get an unforgettable listen that at times it's hard not to get emotional from. It's one of the best examples this year I can think of for a project to show someone that says either hip hop is dead or just not a valid form of music in the first place, because I really don't see how anyone could deny the power of beloved Paradise Jazz. This next album was super close to having the number one spot, and it actually did have it for the majority of the year, but as amazing as it is, and as much as it's been on repeat, it ultimately had to get second place, and that number two album is none other than JPEG Mafia and Danny Brown's glitchy, chaotic Scaring the Hose. This may be the album I've listened to the most this year, as it's one of the few times a collaboration that I was really excited for truly lived up to the hype, arguably even more than I was expecting. I had been excited to hear these two work together more ever since Peggy's placements on Danny's last album, You Know What I'm Saying, and neither disappointed as JPEG provides some of his most futuristic and experimental production yet, and Danny was given a whole new style and sound to work with. Being teamed up with a double threat like Peggy, Danny knew he'd really have to pull no punches and bring his A game for this collaboration, and he did because both of these dudes excel with their own respective styles, but both had to slightly alter them to better match each other. For example, Danny was put on slightly faster BPMs than he's used to, and the speed of these beats forced him to pick up the pace and try some flows he may have not had a chance to try otherwise. Adversely, Peggy has always had the songwriting and production aspects of his music down, but he's not quite as seasoned a lyricist as Danny, though it isn't a drastic difference. These two also have an easier time staying on the same page thematically than a lot of people who are in groups together, and they're completely in tune when it comes to the overall aesthetic this album's going for. While Scaring the Hose is layered, funny, twisted, and downright addicting, as I said, it just barely missed the number one spot. And speaking of which, that number one album is the newest release by Armand Hammer or Billy Woods and Elucid, with the latest addition to their already impressive discography, We Buy Diabetic Test Strips. While I loved the last Armand Hammer album, which was Haram with The Alchemist, as well as the majority of their output through the 2010s, initially I just really liked their latest LP. I wasn't blown away, I just enjoyed it like any album by these two and kind of went about my year. But as I progressively went back to it more and more, I found the same thing happening that happened with Haram, where it grew on me substantially, to the point where it went from, I guess I'll give that Armand Hammer album another listen, to finding myself craving the experience. I feel like that's something Billy, Elucid, and the whole Backwoods Studios crew do really well, which is giving you music that isn't instantly gratifying, it sits and marinates with you over time, like chicken or fish or maybe a nice artichoke. Sometimes I forget how challenging their music can be to a new listener, since I've been familiar with their voices and styles for so long now. But if you enjoy experimental, dark, or even just lyrical hip hop, I really don't see how you couldn't at least respect and admire what Armand Hammer pulled off here. Billy Woods already had a virtually unrivaled discography when it comes to modern rappers, at least in my opinion. But with all his quality output so far in the 2020s, the gap between him and his contemporaries is just getting wider and wider. I was also very happily surprised when I learned that JPEG Mafia's name was in the mix for collaborators on this thing, because there was a kind of under the radar beef between Elucid and Peggy that I'm not even sure many of either of their fans really know about. There were slight subs back and forth over numerous projects, but honestly, if I hadn't stumbled across a random small video on those disses when they happened a couple years ago, I probably never would have known about the beef either. Honestly, it was such a small and scarcely covered beef that until this point, I wasn't even really sure if it had happened or if it was just a rumor. Regardless, it appears to have been squashed, and by putting whatever differences they had aside, Peggy managed to have a hand in both of my top two albums this year, which both approach dark, forward thinking, and experimental hip hop in completely unique and different ways. And with that, we've reached the end of my top 50 favorite hip hop albums of 2023. Thank you for watching, and if you made it this far, be sure to like, subscribe, and let me know what your top 5 favorite hip hop albums were for this year. Don't forget to have a great day, and I'll see you next time, okay? Alright.